This is Brian Gordon with Chapter 9 of the Spellgrazer Saga. Chapter 9, Fluttering Pages. Chandra's bag reappeared from under a veil of scarves, and they all began to stuff it with more loot than Dunmall knew could reasonably fit into it. The fires started by the demon's attacks had begun to die down, but they had lit torches and could see well enough now that the unnatural darkness surrounding the demon had dissipated. Each of them took a moment to pick out a personal memento from their adventure together, a treasure to mark one in a long line of journeys that would define their lives. As the heap of coins and gems began to shrink, something caught Dunmall's eye, and he grabbed the tray they had been piled onto and dumped them all on the floor. Beneath the waterfall of riches, a large shield appeared, blackened metal encircling a polished green surface with a design formed from white metal as reinforcement. He shook the remaining gold off and put his arm through the rich leather loops on the back. It was heftier than his old shield, but it seemed to wrap perfectly around his arm, and he became accustomed to it immediately. What he did not notice was the design on the front shifting into a face whose lips curled into a wicked grin. Ronsa eyed a set of daggers, whose blades were curved and jagged in a grim pattern, and found they fit quite well into his sheaths. Barlow collected several small trinkets, some of which he planned to cleanse of evil and foreign gods, some of which he planned to present to the House of Light for investigation. After they had taken what they liked, the group began their descent of the tower, moving quickly to avoid any chance of ambush or retaliation from their recent slaughter. No signs of survivors appeared as they made their way back through the decrepit remains of the castle. Once outside the inner walls, the small group found their way to the Donkey King, or, more correctly, he found them. His honks and excited bellows were a clear guide which they followed to a hole in the outer wall, which he had wandered through in hopes of avoiding any of the residual violence from the castle. Before they had even reached him, Chandra had the wizard's spellbook in her hands and was thumbing through the notes to find a counter for the polymorphic spell. Her eyes lit up an electric blue when she found what she was looking for. When they greeted the Donkey King, they told him of their struggle, and the condition of his castle. Though sadness bore through the huge black eyes, he still only wished to be rid of his current form, free from his life of imprisonment as a lowly ass. He had come to terms with the fact that his kingdom was lost ages ago. It only struck Dunmall then that they did not know how long the king had been trapped as a donkey. His perception of time, as an animal, seemed to have been lost. It could have been years, decades, or possibly longer, the mysteries of such powerful magic far beyond Dunmall's own personal realm of understanding. Chandra, however, seemed to know what to do, preparing a series of shapes and symbols in a ring on the ground. Her hands began to flow in a pattern as she chanted in a hypnotic rhythm. Energy crackled as it filled the air around them. She asked Barlow to bless the ring, adding a final layer to the mixed magics used to counter the spell. The king stepped into the field of light and swirling energies as Chandra completed the ritual. A bright glow enveloped the creature, and inside the luminous cocoon he slowly began to reform fingers and toes. Arms and legs defined themselves, and eventually he reclaimed his human form. When the light surrounding him faded, Dunmall tossed a blanket over him and set some spare garments from his pack next to the newly formed man. "Thank you, my friends," were the first words he spoke as a human before collapsing in an exhausted heap. As he slept, the group of adventurers set up camp for the evening there against the wall. Ronsa had gathered some remains of a wooden fence for a fire, and a variety of magical barriers had been set up to ward off danger for the night. The magical cloth from Chandra's bag once again reformed into a tent for all of them to rest in, and before long the ethereal nether of the dream world took over each of them. One by one they drifted into their own private worlds within their minds, each focused on various aspects of days past and days to come. Barlow was troubled by the infestation of the unholy blight and the ever-growing forces of evil gathering more and more on the surface of Carados. Pure evil filled the hillside in his dream, trampling him and tearing the land to pieces. In his nightmare he saw a temple of Hair and Sol crumble, the power of the light fading under the dark swarm that ravaged his dream. He saw an ancient relic, lost in the ruins of the temple, still alive with a dim glow, and he knew he must find it in order to preserve the power of the light. His elders would be very interested to know of his visions, and decided to visit the main temple before departing on his next journey. Dunmall slept even less peacefully as visions of terror filled his mind, ancient horrors the magnitude of which he could barely even comprehend. Devastating spells were being unleashed, further destroying the lands of Carados which he loved so much. Chaos on such a massive scale that he could not help but cry out at seeing his world destroyed. From behind him, a hand of sorts came to rest on his shoulder. He turned to see a being of light shrouded by a swirling darkness. It had no face, only a vague memory of one. It pointed to the terrors that filled the sky, and then patted its own chest as well as Dunmall's shoulder. "We can stop this?" Dunmall asked between heartbroken breaths. The featureless being nodded in agreement, wordless still. Both of its hands went towards its chest, and the darkness parted to reveal the brightest light Dunmore had ever seen. In the glare, he thought he saw a face, its mouth growing wider as the light engulfed him in the blink of an eye. Next, he saw himself enshrouded by the darkness of the being, but he was consuming the very magic that was destroying his homelands. He did not know whether the being was good or evil, nor did he care at that moment. A bond was formed. Ronsa did not dream. He refused to. Long ago, he learned that the fevered dreams of an adventurer are often not their own at all. It was actually such a dream that led him to start his journey several years ago, only to find that it had been engineered to lure him to his death, his soul to be the feast for a vicious harpy. That was also when he learned he had a keen mastery over his blades, and from that point on he made it his goal to help rid the world of such beings, no longer an easy target for such vile forces. Dreamlessly, he let his body recover from the day of slaughter. Chandra stayed awake the longest, reading as much of the wizard's tome as she could until her eyelids became heavier than stone and slowly worked their way down. A fog filled her mind as the book itself began to work a very peculiar sort of magic, a hint of the sorcerer's spirit gifted into the pages themselves. Spell by spell, a mystic shroud enveloped her, blocking her from the waking world. Eyes blinked open in the design on Dunmall's shield. A nose sniffed lightly. Metal lips parted slightly in a grim sneer. A strong wind blew out the tiny flickers of fire that remained. Darkness surrounded the small group until a brilliant flash burst forth from the book, only to be swallowed back into the darkness before it could reach its intended target. More flashes, brighter, in a dazzling variety of colors, all met the same fate. Suddenly, the pages of the book went stiff with what seemed to be fear, and it let out a signal. From a dark crack between two inconspicuous slabs of rock from a section of wall that none of them paid any attention to, a small imp scurried down the stairs of the castle, out through the inner wall, and up to the broken wall where they had made camp. The wards Chandra had placed were consumed, along with the spells that shot out from the fluttering pages, and the imp was free to sneak up and snatch the book away from Chandra's lap. Something had prevented the book from killing the small group, and the imp was its only chance for escape. It hissed as it grabbed its master. A metallic snort from Dunmall's direction challenged it, and the small creature ran away in fear, book in hand. Chandra's spirit was free to return to consciousness, as the spells binding her had been eaten along with her wards, and she looked about in confusion and concern as she realized the book had been taken. The sun had started to rise, but had not peeked over the hills surrounding them, the air still moist from the night's dew. Chandra took a few moments to compose herself before she stood up, her mind still foggy as the morning mists. She let her senses reach out around her. Once she found that her barrier had been completely taken down, she immediately set to work feeling out the area for any hints as to what had become of the wizard's tome. Thank you for joining me for Chapter 9.